Hello, everybody. We have a small crowd at the moment, so why don't we give people a couple of more minutes in case folks trickle in, and then we can get started.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, we gave people some time, so I think we can kick off. Welcome, everyone, back to the Mimi Interim. This is the note well. Hopefully, people are familiar with it. It governs all of our activities here today during the meeting. Is someone willing to take notes for us? Just, discussion points and decisions, not, not verbatim notes. Anybody can volunteer for this? We really need a note taker in order to move forward here, so. I'm wondering what kind of inducements are needed to get somebody to take notes today. All right. I can take a stab, but I don't have a co-chair today, so it's pretty tough for me to run the meeting and take the notes and not have a co-chair. So would really prefer somebody else take notes, but since nobody seems willing, I will do my best. So we have just the one agenda item today. Femi is going to talk about the updates to the discovery requirements document, and I think pick up from where we left off the last time we talked about this like a month ago. And as I said on the list, we're hoping that this will kind of flesh out the full discussion, and we'll be preparing for an adoption call for this document. Does anybody want to bash the agenda? No. Okay. Then, Femi, I will kick it over to you.
Okay. Okay, thanks everyone. We presented this deck, another version of it, IETF 120. So they were based on the feedback from that meeting. We made a couple of changes to the draft, and I kind of reused the same deck for today and just highlighted areas where we made changes. Of course, feel free to jump in and ask questions at any point as I proceed. Next slide. Okay, so Mimi user discovery, this is the problem it is about, allows a user to find a recipient without prior knowledge of the messaging service where the recipient could be reached. So this draft essentially describes the requirement for user discovery using two primary identifiers, which is the email address and phone numbers. Next slide. So yeah, we don't really have changes from the last presentation. Alyssa, if you don't mind, can we just skip? Unless people really want me to go over this one more time. Okay, good. Thank you. So the highlighted part are the areas where additional clarification was added for today, given the number of questions that came up at IETF 120. Basically, when a verifiable mapping is computed, that is, this phone number could be used to reach this user in this MSP. A representation of that mapping can be distributed by other discovery provider, not necessarily the one that computed the mapping. So the understanding is that the mapping will include metadata that will allow any party that sees that mapping to verify that these three entities, that is the client, the MSP, and the DP, were jointly involved in computing the mapping. So there was question about, do we need to trust the party that is distributing the mapping? No, the answer is no. The user doesn't need to trust the discovery provider that is distributing the mapping. Next slide, please. Okay, we kind of broke down the requirement into these 5 groups. We basically cover almost all of these at IETF 120. The only one we did not really cover is the security and abuse prevention. And that one is pretty much straightforward. Maybe next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so sorry, can you back up one more? Yeah. So here is the requirement for creating the mapping of the CSI to the MSP. All the requirement presented previously is essentially the same. The only one that we clarify based on what I shared previously is item requirement number 3, in the sense that the mapping can be distributed to other DPs, and irrespective of the distribution source, clients that receive a mapping is able to verify that mapping cryptographically, maybe checking signatures and things like that, that the mapping was computed by the parties that were indicated. That's it. Next slide. So maybe one more slide. Okay, let me talk to this. So preferences was something that we found very challenging because there were just so many ways to do it. And the recommendation we gave was to defer elaborate preference handling to implementations. However, we want to provide a basic recipient preference requirement. So here is another change we made in the current version of the draft. Here previously we said we should include a preference index or a string, but now we want to call it a tag, which is essentially a string value. So for example, user has the same telephone number that the user registered with multiple discovery providers as shown here. So we expect the user to tag those mapping appropriately. We only expect one of the mapping to be tagged with the default tag, to mean that when you get multiple mapping from me, this is my preferred way for you to reach me. A tag will also indicate preferences based on what the recipient would like to communicate with the user with. For example, the WhatsApp one, or it could be a couple of tags like the third one I have on the screen here, oops, friend, personal, and things like that. So it's user readable, it's flexible. Application could adapt to passing that string to be able to break the tie and so on. Of course, we know there are cases whereby user just tag all their mappings with the default tag with different DPs and so on. So it's now up to the recipient of the multiple mappings to now say, okay, all of them is default. I just pick one. However, for implementation, we want to encourage that this picking one out of equally tagged option should be done once, and the state could be saved, so that we don't want messages to be bouncing across different MSP for the same user. Yep. Okay, Rohan, are you on the? No, you good? Okay.
Yeah. So hi. Okay. So I guess my first question is about the semantics of default, or the semantics. If you don't include a tag, it returns everything. And then once, go ahead.
Yeah. So if you don't include, it returns everything essentially. So the tagging is the owner of the mapping that says, okay, I tag this to help recipient to know something about my preference for how this mapping could be used. So we expect that during discovery, all the mappings in different DPs for that particular telephone number will be returned in a query. So you have like all of these three in your response.
Okay, so it's not like you would need to request an exact tag name.
No.
And okay, I'm a little worried about the privacy implications of that, but the other thing I wanted to, so like basically all my questions were about like how how these sort of default and interactions and privacy of these tags works. But I think you've given me an idea of how it works, how it was intended to work, envisioned to work in this in this document.
So what is the privacy concern that you had, if you don't mind?
Oh, sorry. Did you have a question back to Rowan?
No, to Rowan. What was the privacy concern? I'm trying to kind of understand it better, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I had, let's say that I had, a kinky fetish group that I wanted to put a tag for, then that I don't want people who are searching for my work preference to see that possibly present in the UI. Did you want the Rowan's, realtor work context and his, or his kinky fetish, context? And people are like, oh, like, like I wouldn't want to reveal that necessarily, right?
Yeah, that's a good call out. Yeah, obviously you wouldn't any potential name that is very sensitive, you wouldn't want to use it. You can call it with a code name or whatever, so that only people in that cycle kind of understand what this particular tag is meant for and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So just like, kind of the idea would maybe if there was an ability to put a mapping in that was, this must be an exact match, then that could conceivably solve this problem.
Okay. So you want the tag not to be a little bit constrained from a list.
So like I could register a tag and I have an attribute associated with the tag, which is I guess enumeratable or iteratable, and so if it's iteratable, then if you do a query with no tag, then you get all of them, all the ones that are not iteratable, that are iteratable. If it's not set, then you have to do an exact match in order to get that tag.
I see. Yeah.
Just an idea.
Okay. Thanks for that feedback. Okay. Yeah. Preferences is something else, and that's just a nice idea that could be considered. Yeah. Okay. Next slide. Thank you, Alyssa. We did not make any update to the request, I believe, apart from ordering some of the requirements. If you go to the next slide and the next, I think, the next. Yeah, we just changed the ordering for this requirement. There's no additional change. Next. Yeah, so this also was an existing requirement that we just want to highlight. When phone number is reissued to a new user, if the previous owner of that telephone number established some mappings for that phone number, and when he kind of releases the number, it didn't clear the number from the DP service. So we expect that for the new owner of that phone number, the first mapping the user makes, it should kind of indicate that this is the first mapping I'm establishing for the CSI, so that the DPs would know to kind of send invalidation requests to other DPs so that they can clear any existing mapping that may exist for this CSI. So that's the idea. Next slide. Yeah, so the security requirement standard things that one would expect for this. I don't expect any concern for this. Blackout prevention, we want to be able to protect the mapping so that they could not be easily enumerated by an attacker, basically to learn all the telephone numbers that have been mapped for a particular DP. So we want to be able to prevent that from happening. And of course, all the exchange of data between the DPs and the MSPs must be over an encrypted channel. Next slide.
Sorry, I have a question about this one.
Sure.
About the rate limiting, because this came up previously, like whether people's sense is that you can set a rate limit that distinguishes between legitimate request activity and like somebody who's actually trying to attack you, and how that intersects with the behavior of when you first set up an account or you're like uploading you're first bootstrapping your account on a new service, and you're you're trying to bootstrap your entire address book. Like, can you talk about that? Because this is pretty vague, right? So we don't really indicate one way or another whether we actually think rate limiting is feasible, given the volumes that you're expecting in typical use cases.
Yeah. So there are ways to do that. So there are two scenarios. When the first one is when the user is identifiable, right? We know there's a username, the service kind of recognizes the user, then rate limiting is very straightforward, right? The second scenario where the user cannot be identified, maybe the user is anonymous and so on. We don't know if the first time the user is coming or this is like the 100th time and so on. Also because of the privacy requirement we have with this, so we need to make sure queries of a user could not be tied to the user identity. So there are ways to do that using things like blind signature, where the user kind of have a limited set of tokens, let me call it tokens, to spend. Maybe within a 24-hour window, you have like a budget, like you can do 50 queries and things like that. And those tokens will be renewed after that period expire. But within that period, you need to provide a token that has not been spent for each query that you make, and so on. Yeah. That's how we potentially could handle that requirement.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. I think as long as people broadly feel like it's feasible to make these to distinguish between legitimate and illegitimate users, I think it's fine to state the requirement at this level. I just don't want to be stating a requirement that we know that can't be fulfilled. That's all.
Yeah, thank you. Good call out. Thanks. Okay, next slide. So these are just the three requirements based on what we just covered in the prior deck. Next slide. Then, so these are like additional high-level things that we didn't cover in detail in the draft. For the discovery providers, all the communication between them, maybe in order to exchange mappings or to serve query requests and things like that, there need to be a protocol on how all of these DPs work together. Of course, the aspect of data sovereignty, where you have phone number and things like that. You don't want to. Some countries, especially in the EU and so on, we want the data to be locally resident within EU and things like that, and not be exported to the US and things like that. So some of those constraints are still there. Those are what practical implementation will need to address. The last one here is the need for a registry. Like, I'm a DP, how do I know? And I need to respond to a discovery request, but how do I, and I don't have the response for that, but how do I outsource that request to other DPs? Where are other DPs that I need to reach if they are able to provide a response to this query? So I need to be able to know the endpoints where to reach those other discovery services. So that's the point of the registry. Next slide. Yeah, I think that's it. That's what we're looking for to propose for the discovery requirement. Yeah, I want to appreciate all the feedback. This has been a very long journey, more than a year of working through this. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to go back for a second to these because I was just looking at this section of the document as well. So these you're just calling out, but they don't actually impose requirements on the protocol.
Yes.
Okay. I think that could probably be made a little bit more clear in the doc. That's all. I mean, it's fine to mention these things, but also to be explicit that we're not like doing anything to accommodate them.
That's right.
So, yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Ron.
Okay. So 2 questions. The first is, Femi, about how many DPs do you think would realistically exist? Like, do you think this is a handful? Do you think this is tens, or do you think this is, hundreds or thousands?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, I mean, when we discuss this, obviously we know like the big MSPs may want to have their own DPs and things like that, but we can also kind of say we have to have a fixed number of DP, only 10, only 50, only 1,000 and things like that. It needs to be open for small players to be able to join as well. So I can't really tell. Yeah, but the understanding there could be up to 500, 1,000, possibly. Yeah, over time.
Yep. Okay. And then I just wanted to bring up, so Ori asked about the code names, which I'm assuming by which he meant tags, context tags. So, I think we got a variety of options there. We could have, we could use like a URN kind of space so that there could be some that are registered, and then, but then there's sort of space in there where you could have user-defined tags, I think, or user-defined portions of the, at the very end of the URN.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's a good feedback. Thank you. I think we can certainly do that. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments and so on?
Okay. Oh, did someone else join? No. Okay. So, thank you for all of the work that you put into this. I think it's, the latest version just came out a few days ago, so we will initiate the call for adoption and really hoping for people to do a close review of this and both respond to the call for adoption and send their feedback. And yeah, we can do that on the list. And then once the call for adoption closes, we can move it into the working group GitHub repo and start collecting issues and PRs that way. That works for you.
Sounds good.
But definitely really want additional feedback on this since it's still relatively new. All right. Does anybody else have anything? Okay. We're getting a little sleepy here in this working group. So I think we have an interim scheduled again 2 weeks from now, and would be great to return back to the protocols and the privacy metadata stuff if people have updates. But if things don't get updated, then we can also cancel. So those are sort of our 2 options at this point. Rowan, go ahead.
Yeah. So I have, stuff that I've talked about previously, the role-based access control and some stuff that I posted to the list about selective disclosure of information that could be shared with a group but not shared with the hub. and the anti-abuse stuff. I have, you know, I'm going to be working on those over the next 2 weeks, and so I'll hopefully have at least 1 or 2 of those topics that I can discuss at the next interim.
Okay, that sounds good.
And in the
you also got-
meantime, if anybody wants to send more feedback on any of those documents, that will probably spur me into action on that particular topic.
Okay, yeah, you got some feedback on the content format, I think.
Yeah, I saw Timo sent. Hi, Timo. He sent some comments, and that's on my list for this week to reply as well. So.
Okay, great. Anyone else have anything? Okay, you get 90 minutes back.
All right, thank you.
We're doing everyone a solid. So, all right. Thanks, Femi. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.